Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Saved by Quarantine by Muffin Breath. This goes back a few years ago to when I was living in a somewhat rough city in interior BC. It all started out in the lineup to pay at a value village, when a man in front of me turned to make a comment about something I was buying. The conversation pretty much immediately flew off the rails from there as he started in on a completely erratic and unrelated wall of sound about a German shepherd he had 16 years ago, and that new German, blah 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 blah. It was disjointed speech, weird subject matter. I mean, it was pretty clear to me right off the bat that he was missing a few marbles. I thought nothing more of the encounter after we both paid and left. Fast forward, again at Value Village. I would often go tune out and thrift as my relief from the toll of exams and studying. And I noticed the man again. He walked right up to me and started to engage in conversation. Something about some obscure historical event that I didn't even know about. I gave short but polite answers as I wasn't really in the mood to chat. I wish I had been more direct in that moment. I went about my time thrifting and occasionally noticed in my peripheral that he was observing me from a distance. No biggie. A few days later, I met VV again, starting in my normal spot of the store, women's shoes, when the man sidled right up out of nowhere. He didn't say hi this time, just kind of blankly stared, and we briefly made eye contact. By that point, I was a little weirded out by our encounters, but not necessarily worried. I quickly scuttled away from interacting with him anyway. Later in class, I mentioned the encounters to a friend of mine from the same university program. Because, after all, I'm a single female who lives alone and I also listen to a lot of true crime. Within our close-knit university program, there was a running joke that the close friend of mine, I'll call her Rachel, and I were twins, in that we were the same height, both had long blonde hair and glasses. Facially, we were quite different, but I always understood the mix-ups. Rachel came into class one morning and told me that the night before, when she and her boyfriend had gone out to the grocery store, he parked and she ran inside. When she returned to her car, her boyfriend told her that he had seen an older man notice her in the parking lot and watched from his truck as the man followed her into the store. Something had definitely indicated following to him. Rachel agreed it was odd and mentioned that while inside a man had approached her, but when she turned to address him, he said, "Sorry, I thought you were someone else," and left. Rachel instantly thought back to the man I had mentioned, and after noting a few distinguishable features, we were quickly able to establish that it was indeed the same guy. By this point, it had become a bit that I had a stalker, but I honestly wasn't feeling scared or threatened yet. He was a scruffy-looking guy in his mid-50s who seemed kind of lonely and awkward, and I assumed that my initial engagement and conversation those weeks back had given him the impression that we were friends of some sort. Perhaps he was failing to read my cues of disinterest. I also still didn't know if he was purposely seeking me out or if we happened to go to the same places around the same time as one another. At one point, I thought maybe I was being paranoid, and he was actually an employee at Value Village. He wasn't. This is about the time his behavior started ramping up. Again, at Value Village. I know. At this point it's like yelling, "Don't go in there," to a girl in a horror movie. But you have to understand, this was a small, boring-ass town, and thrifting gave me a shred of joy. I was holding up clothing items to myself in a large mirror in the corner of the store to see how they looked. As I was holding up a dress to my body, my eyes focused in the mirror to the movement above my right shoulder. Every hair on my body stood up as I realized it was the man, crouching between racks of baby clothing from about 30 feet away, watching me. This time I made no mistake, and I was sure he was at very least seeking me out. Flight kicked in, and I quickly left the store, now concerned that he likely knew which car I drove. Late in the evening, a couple nights later, I was picking something up at the grocery store. I was walking along the fronts of the aisles, reading the hanging food directory signs above, when I noticed someone at the opposite end of the aisles was matching my pace and mirroring me from about 60 feet away. Step in step, expressionless and staring, was the man. It was at this point I knew I should at least make mention of his behavior to the local police. The police unfortunately treated me like I was wasting their time and provided little comfort or understanding. After all, the guy was only just looking at me. I opened a police file and was told I could come back if things got worse. My dad then shipped me a probably illegal pocket taser that I kept on my person. The last time I ever went to the Value Village was after I had seen him enter the store, and for once I was the one watching him. I hid behind support poles and racks, ducking out of sight, and watched as he made a beeline to my usual starting spot, women's shoes. He did a quick perimeter lap of the store, scanning as he paced about, and I felt my heartbeat thumping in my throat as I watched him repeatedly look down and reach into a side duffel bag he had with him. He left the store after about 2 minutes, and not looking at a single item of clothing. He wasn't there to shop. He was looking for something he didn't find, and he was frustrated. It was now mid-March of 2020 when I spotted him at my university campus, watching my friends and I from a distance as we waited outside of class. We were murmuring something about the weird virus on the horizon and how we hoped our exams would be canceled. The guy quickly ducked out of view as I pointed him out, but not before Rachel had seen and confirmed that this was indeed the man she had mentioned months prior. This was bolder than he had been previously, and I worried how much of my schedule he actually knew. The same day as I walked the 300 meters to my apartment complex across from the university, I saw him perched outside my building entrance, hands in his lap, duffel bag at his side. At this point I felt like prey, and in my gut I knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated to truly dangerous. He knew my schedule, where I lived, and that I lived alone. I hustled to the back entrance before he caught sight of me and cried on the phone to my long-distance boyfriend. I was terrified. After an uneasy night, I woke up to an email from our program director. Our exam had indeed been canceled, along with the rest of in-class schoolwork. Students from out of town were free to return home as classes moved to an online platform for the foreseeable future. I packed a bag and left the next morning, only to return for my possessions some weeks later with my boyfriend in tow. I never saw that man again. It's only on reflection years later that I am able to appreciate how fucked up the whole situation was. After initially going to the police, I felt like I was being dramatic, but looking back it's clear to see the level of statistical danger I was in. In my heart of hearts, I feel like things weren't simply going to just go away on their own, and I shudder to think about what he had planned next, or what he had in his bag. In some weird way, the pandemic possibly saved my ass. So to my scruffy mid-50s stalker, I'm sure you're wondering where I went. I guess I really disappeared on you. How rude of me. Skinwalker Attack in Australia by Y-Man. I want to say that I'm not entirely sure that this is a skinwalker, since I live in Australia. But what we encountered seems close enough, so that is why I describe it as a skinwalker. It was the summer of 2015. My buddy, whom I will call P, and his older yet still teenage cousin, who happened to be staying at his place at the time, whom I'll call L, were hanging out at P's place since we were on school holidays in the summer. We were both in high school, and I don't know if any of you know, but Australia has summer around the same time as Christmas. So naturally, being a few days near Christmas, that was mainly on our minds. Eventually, P's mom told us to leave to take the dogs for a walk. We thought that was a bit strange, since she usually isolated us to P's backyard, mainly his old treehouse, P's bedroom, and P's pool. This was done so that she could keep an eye on us because a few friends in the past had stolen some things. So this request was very odd. For reference, P's dad was away on a business trip, but regardless of how strange her request, we did what she asked. P has 2 dogs, a male golden retriever and a female Caucasian shepherd. I won't say their names, but both dogs have quite long hair, and since the Australian summers get quite hot, they had to cut the fur so things would be better for them. Also, I know that most people don't know what a Caucasian shepherd dog is. It's a Russian dog, also known as the Russian ovcharka and Russian bear dog. They're known to be shepherd dogs with good guarding abilities and are very large and strong, which is why they're able to fight wolves and bears. But please note, they can't kill a wolf or bear. That's just a myth. But when I say fight, I mean that they can injure a wolf or bear to the point that they'll give up on attacking the livestock that they're guarding. Anyway, the 3 of us began to walk the dogs, and after a while, since it was hot, Elle said that we should take a trail in the nearby bush so that we could get some shade. We all agreed, and so we went into the bush. Usually, in the long summer, you don't go in the bush due to snakes, but we were young and wanted to get out of the sun, so we just went. About 10 minutes of walking into the bush, both dogs stopped. The golden retriever started whimpering and tried to run away, and the Caucasian shepherd stood her ground, simultaneously sniffing the air, then growling. We figured out quickly that something had spooked them. Elle thought that the golden retriever might have gotten bit by a snake. Now, like I said before, both dog breeds usually have long hair enough to somewhat protect them from snake bites, but since it was summer and their hair was short, that was a problem, and they would need to be taken to a vet immediately if they had been bit. Elle quickly checked and couldn't see anything indicating a snake bite. As I looked around for snakes, regretting that we even came out there, I saw it, and it was far from a snake. At first I thought it was either a kangaroo or another large dog, but I quickly realized that it wasn't. It was about 17 meters away from us, which in the US math is about 55 feet. This thing was acting odd as it had its back against a tree, arms crossed like a human, and it was just watching us. Kangaroos usually just lay down if they're tired, but this thing was upright, laying back on a tree. The thing I saw was tall, like a man-kangaroo hybrid. Its arms were human, but with small claws on its fingers, and it was covered with fur. Yet its body and legs were like a kangaroo, and were an extremely light brown coat. Its face was similar to that of a kangaroo, but was also a bit squarer, shaped like a mastiff dog. And its eyes were very human. So I yelled out to my friends, "What is that kangaroo doing?" P and L looked over and both saw it and said something on the lines of, "That ain't no kangaroo, mate." Then it simultaneously ran and hopped as it came towards us. I think that it only attacked us because we saw it, as it didn't look predatory when we spotted it, almost like it was just minding its own business. When it saw us, it thought we were a threat or something. We didn't really have time to run, only making it 2 steps backing up before it was right in front of us. Yeah, this thing was very fast. It lunged at me, but just as it was knocking me to the ground, the shepherd jumped up, biting its arm. P fell forward and let go of the lead, since he was holding the shepherd. This dog can have a bite force of up to 700 psi. You know that this creature was truly in pain, and it let out a yelling sound similar to that of a dog's whimper of pain. The shepherd's jaws just clamped down on the arm. The creature then began to claw it with its free hand. I was basically pinned on the ground as the 2 were fighting above me. The shepherd did manage to move from the arm to the creature's neck, but that somehow didn't kill the creature. The creature again yelled out in pain, but the shepherd was possibly too weak from its injuries or the heat of the day to really continue the bite around the neck. The creature managed to push the dog off, and it looked like the fight was about to turn in favor of the creature, but Elle grabbed a large stick nearby and swung it at the back of the creature's head. It barely did anything, and the creature turned towards him, grabbing the stick as Elle went for another swing. This gave time for the shepherd to jump onto the creature's back with whatever strength it had left, and it bit into the creature's shoulder. Clearly giving up, the creature got the shepherd off itself again before it ran and hopped away into the bush out of sight. We all just ran out of the bush as fast as we could get back to P's house. P and Elle were crying, and I was limping, barely able to keep up. We needed an adult, so P ran upstairs to his mother's room as Elle was checking my cuts and the Caucasian shepherd's wounds. But all we heard from upstairs was a scream from P's mom as she brought him downstairs by the ear wearing lingerie, and a man in his underwear who was not P's father walking down the stairs behind her. She was pissed, but after seeing the shepherd's injuries and my scratches, she calmed down and told the man to leave, and he did. She quickly got changed, and it was Elle who told her what had happened, but said it was a large feral dog. She believed him, and she took the shepherd to a vet while Elle took me to a doctor since he had a car. The shepherd unfortunately died in 2019, not due to her injuries. The golden retriever is still alive and well. As for the creature itself, I did some research online, including watching YouTube videos. The most likely thing that I thought it could be was a skinwalker. But I do have my doubts as I live in Australia and not the US. I've recently learned that the Aboriginals believed in a creature called Crawdaddy, which is basically a skinwalker with some minor differences, but there are certain characteristics that make me doubt that it was a Crawdaddy and more likely a skinwalker. So honestly, I don't know what we actually encountered, but what I do know is that when I do decide to get a dog, the Caucasian shepherd is in my top 10 for obvious reasons. The time I was stabbed by Dear Meteor. This story was when I was younger and braver, and kinda did stupid stuff without thinking. It's a wild ride, and it's all true. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street from 2 p.m. until they closed. I usually didn't get off until 11 or so at night, and I had a car but was close enough to walk, so I did that most days to save gas. On this particular night, I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists, tired but happy to have a good job and just generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead, about a block from my place, I saw an attractive guy in dark clothing walking, but not with a purpose really. He was taller than me, maybe 5'10" or 6 foot or so, and had shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he was really good looking. Like, even in the dark of night, I was starting to get excited. His features kind of escape me now, but I do remember his hair and his thick eyebrows. I took an earbud out, and because I'm from a dangerous city and never really cared about stranger danger, I decided to talk to him, maybe even flirt a little bit. I asked him, "How's your late night going?" And he said, "Good, just looking to get drunk." And I said, "Oh, that I can help with. I've got a minibar at my place. I live just down the street." That's not verbatim, but basically how the conversation went. During the walk back to my place, I got no red flags from this guy. He seemed totally normal, and I was honestly thinking, wow, just through sheer luck I met this super hunky guy, and he seemed cool and fun. I was beside myself, really. So we got to my apartment on the second floor. I jumped into host mode and offered him a seat and make himself comfortable. The apartment is about 640 square feet, so it's very small. Except for the bathroom, you can see the rest of the apartment from any area. I headed into the kitchen, and while I was pouring drinks, I glanced back over at him. It was then that I noticed the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he was more delayed with his answers, especially more so than he was just on our walk there. It was just odd to me. I went back over to the couch, passed him his drink, and sat down next to him. "So, what do you do for work?" I asked. "Oh, I'm not here for sex." He put his drink down on the table. I said, "What do you mean? I'm not after sex either." He stood up. "What you got?" he asked me. His nice guy vernacular and friendly face were now gone. I was having a hard time processing what he meant by that. I said, "What you got?" The second I stood up, he pushed me back. I flew across the room, hitting the floor, but not hard enough to pass out or anything. I got right back up, but he was already grabbing my laptop and my work bag. As I started towards him, he cut around me and made his way towards the front door. I was right behind him when he made it outside. I managed to grab a hold of him and we tussled again in front of the door, and now I shouted, calling on help from the neighbors. It was late at night and no one came. I was just shouting, "Please help me, I'm being robbed." The thing was, he had my laptop. It's not just any laptop. I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on that laptop at the time. Important photos that I didn't have backed up, thousands of dollars of music programs, video game programming stuff for a development team that I had helped. Really expensive software, etc. It was, in my mind, irreplaceable. I gave chase down the stairs, across the dog walk park, and as I began to gain on him, we tussled again, and the only thing I could focus on was my laptop. I knew that I had to, at any cost, get my laptop back. That was absolutely all I cared about. Somehow, I got a grip on the laptop. I tugged at it again, and I guess he decided I wasn't worth all of the struggle. He got up and started to take off again, and then I realized he still had my work bag. It had my cell phone and wallet with my license, debit card, AAA card, etc. inside it. I took off towards him again, and this time he shouted back at me, "Follow me, and I'll stab you again." That made me stop in my tracks, and he got away. Underneath the street lamp along the sidewalk, I immediately inspected myself. Had I been stabbed? No way, there's no way. Then I saw blood running down my leg. I saw blood on my arm, 2 places where he cut me good. I was scared, but the blood made it look worse than it was. I decided that was enough. I got my laptop, and that's all I really wanted anyway. I hobbled back home and got inside and locked my door. I called the cops using my neighbor's friend's phone the next day and filed a police report explaining the situation, showing the stab wounds and declining medical services. I couldn't afford that, and I was fine, all things considered. So, all that guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like $30 to $40 in it. The cop called my friend back several days later and said that they were not able to find the guy, but they would keep me posted. This was years ago, so I don't know where the robber is now. But now, I have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives. No Good Deed Goes Unpunished by Scrambled Debutante. This happened in the fall of 1993 when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was well before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job, but I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it also put me in the best shape of my life. It was also about this same time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive, as well as an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into the situation in the first place. I had just gotten off work, and it was about 1:30 a.m. My car was running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking nervous and scared. She said that she had been at her boyfriend's house and they had had a fight. She'd walked to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up as she was walking and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large light green car like a Caddy or Lincoln with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said that they had threatened her, and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well-dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out, so I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in the car and that I'd take her home. At that time on a weeknight, there was little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in her seat to see if the car was behind us, and when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept looking for the car. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed she was looking around the car and she started asking me about money. "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money." My stomach sank. I have this woman in my car. Now she's going to rob me? Fuck. But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette, affectionately named Shitbox, and I was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling, "There they are! There they are!" She didn't sound scared anymore. I checked my rear view and, sure enough, the light green car was right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boy's gonna fuck you up, bitch! They're gonna fuck you up!" She was laughing like crazy, and then she opened the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse and telling me all the messed up shit these guys were planning to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I'd been very smart, I would have called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really, really fucking angry, and I realized 3 key things all at once. There was an intersection up ahead with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment, and this crazy bitch still hadn't put on her seatbelt. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross-traffic at the intersection had started to move, and they hadn't caught up. The bitch started yelling. I slammed on the brakes, and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded back to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some serious batshit crazy. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, "Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out of my car before I cut your face off and make you eat it, bitch!" The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped the door open, and I started shoving and punching her until the bitch tumbled out the door to the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while, I stopped to close the passenger door, and then I cut across town and got onto the highway to go home. I was on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shake started. I pulled off onto the shoulder to calm down and get my shit together, and then I drove home. I told my older sister, who I was living with temporarily after the breakup with my ex. I told her everything that happened. She wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I'd never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. Chilling Camping Encounter by Shoddy Worry. When I was 16, my life changed forever. I had broken my back in a bad accident and was bedridden for months, unable to move. The pain was excruciating, but the psychological toll was even worse. Being trapped in a hospital bed, staring at the same four walls day after day. But I was determined to recover and get my life back. As soon as the doctors cleared me, I decided I needed to get out into nature to truly heal my mind and body. My mom agreed that a camping trip down in the beautiful Devon countryside might be just what I needed. She dropped me off at a remote forested area with my tent, some supplies, and a portable charger to keep my phone powered up. I had scoped out what looked like the perfect isolated spot to set up camp. Sure, it seemed to be on private land, but it was getting late and I didn't want to risk camping too close to a public area. I quickly pitched the tent as darkness fell, cracked open a cider, and fired up YouTube on my phone as I settled in to relax. That's when things took a sinister turn. I noticed my phone battery was draining faster than it should, even while charging. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. And that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps tramping through the underbrush, rapidly getting closer. My heart pounded. It sounded like at least 30 footfalls. Was it an aggressive hiker? Or worse, a property owner with a shotgun? In a panic, I unzipped the tent and stuck my hands up, preparing to face whoever was out there. But there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the forest. The footsteps that had been nearly on top of me just seconds before simply faded into an unnatural nothingness. A deep sense of dread washed over me in that moment. Something was horribly wrong here. I turned my head slowly, my gut telling me I wasn't alone. And that's when I saw it, barely 20 feet away, unmoving yet undoubtedly alive. A massive, skeletal beast around 5 feet tall, vaguely resembling a hairless, emaciated dog. Its blank face was frozen in a permanent bestial snarl, lips pulled back to expose rows of jagged teeth. I've never felt such primal, wordless terror. Fight or flight didn't even enter into it. I instinctively scrambled backwards into the tent and zipped it up, curling into a tight ball on the floor. My mind had simply shut down, overloaded by the sight of that thing. After who knows how long, I somehow thought to check my phone in desperation. It was completely drained, so I frantically swapped in the portable charger. An agonizing 50 minutes crawled by before it finally turned back on with just 3% battery remaining. With shaking hands, I managed to text my mom a frantic plea for help, dropping my location pin and a prearranged code phrase for an emergency extraction. The phone died again before she could respond. All I could do was hunker down in my sleeping bag and try not to imagine what sort of ungodly abomination was lurking just outside those thin nylon walls. The next few hours passed like a waking nightmare. Every minor sound, a snapping twig, a rustling bush, sent panic visions through my mind of that towering, bony creature closing in for a kill. Finally, I heard the blessed rumble of an engine in the distance. Risking a peek outside, I nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of my mom's car pulling up. I didn't even wait for the code response. I just grabbed my bag and sprinted straight for her open arms, leaving the tent and all my other belongings behind without a second thought. To this day, I have no rational explanation for what I encountered out in those woods. Maybe it was a delirious hallucination or vivid waking dream brought on by stress and fatigue. Maybe it was just an unfortunate trick of light and shadow playing on my already frayed nerves. All I know is that I never felt such abject primal terror before or since. My body was robbed of all ability for rational thought or action, and only the most basic instincts for self-preservation remained. I'm not generally someone who believes in the supernatural, but that day in Devon will eternally be burned into my psyche as an omen, a warning from the universe that some places are better left undisturbed by human trespassers. If I had pressed on with my ill-fated camping excursion, I shudder to think what other shadowed monstrosities might have surfaced from the murky depths of that ancient woodland. Attack of the Vampire Man by Beautiful Pietist. The story happened when I was about 13, and it might upset some people. However, the facts are what they are, and I can do no more than report what I witnessed. I had a close friend from school, let's call him Paul, and one day we arranged for me to spend the weekend at his house to play games together. He lived in a large place that belonged to his grandmother. It was a large property with a house shaped like a C, but in a square manner. Each side of the C had 2 floors. He lived on the first floor at the bottom of the C, and his grandmother lived on the ground floor at the top. In the middle of the property, there was kind of a Zen garden, which made sense because besides the residential area, the rest of the spaces were intended for Pilates classes, meditation, and such. We were playing games around 2 in the morning when we heard a horrendous scream coming from where Paul's grandmother stayed. Then she shouted, "The Vampire Man! The Vampire Man is here!" Paul apologized to me and rushed to wake his mother, who dashed downstairs and into the darkness of the garden to reach where her mother was. I swear to you that even though the light in Paul's living room was on and the window was open, the bottom part of the property remained very dark. While Paul's mother calmed down her grandmother, he told me a bit about what was going on. Years ago, a disciple of a certain spiritual guru known for some controversies decided that he would open a school of mysteries or initiatory school in my city. The chosen location for this was Paul's grandmother's property where he had lived for some time. Evidently, Paul's grandmother was his disciple. For reasons I don't recall, the guy left, and a few months after his departure, Paul's grandmother started having these episodes where she claimed the Vampire Man was attacking her. That is, she was being vampirized by this guy himself. I've been there other times and kept in touch with Paul over the years, and his grandmother was constantly deteriorating. She would spend days on end writing on the computer every night without sleeping, and she continued to suffer these attacks. I don't know how they are now. A lot has changed, and I lost contact with Paul. The fact is that whatever the reason, whether it's drug use or astral vampirism, Paul's grandmother got herself into a very complicated problem. I've learned to be very careful with supposed gurus, initiations, and absurd promises of all kinds because of this. What Attacked Us by Anonymous. I was in the Fish Lake National Forest hunting with my wife and newborn daughter. I also had 3 friends with me, but they were in a separate vehicle pulling a trailer. We were elk hunting, archery. We pulled off the main road and went on a dirt road as far as we could until we came to a small group of trees, so we pulled into those trees and set up camp. My friends found a spot about 100 feet from my camper and set up there. It wasn't a very level area, so I found some big rocks and drove my truck up to level it out. We spent a couple of days there, and nothing unusual had happened. The last night we were there, around 1:30 a.m., my wife and I were woken up by something hitting the side of my camper. My truck at the time was a 1986 full-size, and we were in an 11-foot camper. The hit on the side of my camper was so hard, it's kind of hard to explain. My wife and I both became immediately awake, and like I said, the hit was so hard that my first thought was that the truck had slipped off the rocks that I had used to level it. Anyone that has ever had something like this happen can imagine how hard something would have to hit my vehicle to have it slip off rocks all of a sudden. I mean, the camper actually rocked back and forth about 6 inches. My daughter remained asleep through this. However, my black lab that is usually ready to bark at any noise outside was just shaking in her bed. I tried to get her up onto the floor of the camper, and she would have nothing to do with that. She just sat there and shook. I got up and stood up in the camper, wondering if I should go outside and see what had happened. At that point, and not knowing what had happened, I really wasn't afraid or anything. I peeked out of the blinds and couldn't see anything. There was a storm in the distance and the lightning was getting close. As I was watching, there was a flash of lightning and it lit up the immediate area around my camper. And all I saw was the long grass, nothing unusual. After about 20 minutes, I returned to bed and got under the covers. My wife and I talked for a few minutes about what we thought it was, and we thought of everything from a tree branch falling and hitting the camper to maybe a bear hitting it. We just didn't know. Just as I was about to fall asleep again, bam! Something else hit on the side of the camper. The same place, but a lot harder this time. It rocked the camper so hard that the doors under the sink actually came open and pans slid out onto the floor, making a bunch of noise. I was wide awake and standing up before I knew it. Something was outside. This happened 20 years ago, and as I'm writing this, I have goosebumps on my arms. I have never been so scared in my life. My dog was shaking like crazy, my wife was not getting out of bed, and I made sure the door was locked. Since we were archery hunting, I couldn't have any firearms. All I had was a knife. The blinds were shut, and I was too afraid to look out. And my wife kept saying, "Look outside or look out the emergency exit." No way. Like I said, I had never been so afraid in my life. To this day, I think that not looking out was one of the biggest mistakes that I've ever made, and I would give anything to have that chance back. Nothing else happened the rest of the night. When we awoke in the morning, I was very cautious and opened the door. The sun was just barely cracking to the east, and the sky was a dark blue. I opened up the door and looked at the ground. The grass around the camper was trampled, but that could have been from us the day before. There were also no tree limbs lying next to the camper. As a matter of fact, as I looked to where the trees actually were, it would have been impossible for a limb to fall and hit us. There were no rocks or anything lying around the truck. And then I looked up at my camper. There on the side of my camper was a huge dent. I'm 6 feet tall, and the dent was so high in my camper that if I stood next to it and tried to touch the dent, I almost had to jump up to reach it. This wasn't an ordinary dent. It was about 8 inches in diameter and about 3 inches deep. It actually dented the aluminum and broke the wood underneath and caused about $400 damage. I went over to my friend's trailer and knocked on their door, and they opened up, and the first thing out of their mouths was, "What were you doing walking around our trailer last night?" I told them what had happened to me, and then that whatever was walking around their trailer was not me. He said he heard me slam my door during the night, and I told him that I hadn't opened the door, and that the noise he had heard was something hitting my camper. I've known these friends for many, many years, and I trust them completely. I've had people say that it was my friends playing a joke on me, but they completely denied that, and I do trust them. I mean, why would you ever play a joke on a friend by damaging his camper and pounding on the side of it while his infant daughter and wife were asleep inside? I consider myself a sane person. I've hunted bears in Montana for a long time. I've killed several bears. I mean, I know how big and powerful bears are, and for the record, I have to say there are bears in that area that we were camping. Not many, but there are some. In my opinion, there is no way that a black bear could have reached as high in my camper as that dent was. And then to hit my camper in the exact same spot 30 minutes apart, there just wasn't any way it was a bear. I know that bears are strong, but to hit my camper with so much force would just be impossible for a bear. He hired a hitman by Anonymous. My mom had been calling a lot. It was my first semester away at college, and her husband had gone batshit insane. He hit her for the first time 4 nights before I moved out, and she locked him out of the house and he banged on the doors. In the middle of one night, he had driven away and she hadn't seen him since. But when I answered her call, she said she had gotten a phone call while she was watching TV. The person on the other end of the line said he had been hired to kill her and her kids, but if she could make him a better offer, he wouldn't do it. He told her what TV show she was watching. He told her what dorm I lived in. He told her that my brother was upstairs playing video games when he was supposed to be asleep. So she ran upstairs, and my little brother was playing video games in his room. She yelled at my brother to pack a bag, and the person on the phone had hung up. Then she called me. I waited for 45 minutes before leaving, hoping my roommates would show up and help me figure out what to do. And I said I'd call the police, but my mom said no. She just asked if please come help her. My roommates didn't come home, and my RA was gone. So I got into my truck and made a 45-minute drive in 20 minutes. The highway was nearly deserted, and I'd hoped a police officer would pull me over. They would know what to do, and I'd be able to say that I hadn't called the cops. I accidentally missed my turn when my mother called me 3 times in a row, and then I accidentally ran a red light when I answered. A cop was right there, but he didn't pull me over. When I got to our neighborhood, I parked 2 streets away and used my ROTC tactical movements to go through the alleys to her backyard. I tried to call my mother, but she didn't answer, so I put my phone on vibrate. Our gate was closed, but when I opened it, I saw a back door standing open, and no one was out in the yard. I hesitated and went in calling softly for our dogs, but they weren't there. Those dogs bark at everything. They were either not in the house or they were dead. I got a knife from the kitchen and I started a room-by-room search of the house. Kitchen and laundry room were clear. I refused to check the garage. Dining room clear. Living room clear, but oh fuck, there was a broken vase. Downstairs bathroom clear. I didn't go into the master bedroom because I fully expected to find my mother dead. I needed to get upstairs to the second bedroom on the right, my bedroom, to get my rifle, the only gun in the house. No one was downstairs, and the upstairs was completely dark. There was a blind corner right at the top of the stairs, and anyone could be hiding there. I was 100% freaking the fuck out as I climbed the stairs, and I got almost halfway up when someone started banging on the front door, which is right in front of the stairs. I froze. I turned halfway so no one could surprise me from the second floor. "Who's there?" I screamed. My cover was blown anyway. If anyone was in the house, they knew I was there. Whoever was outside could see me through the glass at the top of the door, but it was too dark for me to see them. No one answered me, but they kept pounding on the door. "Who the fuck is it?" I screamed. I was now at the base of the steps, and whoever it was kept banging on the door. "I'll kill you, you motherfucker," I screamed as I flung the door open, to see my mother standing there with the dogs in her arms. "Why didn't you answer?" I asked. She said she wasn't sure if it was me or not. "And if it hadn't been me, what were you going to do, throw the dogs at them?" I asked. She hadn't thought that far ahead. I told her the back door had been open, but she said it had been locked when she left. I told her that I checked most of the downstairs and was going upstairs for my gun. She said to go up and get it, so I went up with my knife and checked the upstairs while I was at it. And then I checked the rest of the downstairs. She had taken my brother to a friend's house, which is why she hadn't answered the phone when I called. She had been driving. I spent the rest of the night barricading the doors and windows and begging her to leave. Just leave. She baked me some cookies. Her face was blue and purple from her husband's last visit. She said my brother had tried to protect her, and he didn't look so great either. I told her that I would kill her husband. She said she knew that, and so did he, which is why he left when they called me. I feel like I should mention that I'm a chick, and he was a good foot taller than me and easily 50 pounds heavier, but I would have killed him. In the morning, I had to leave early to be at PT for my ROTC at 5:30 a.m. I had maybe 45 minutes of sleep where my mom had asked me to stay on the living room floor outside the master bedroom. I lost it at PT, and then again in my weekly meeting with my athletics advisor. My ROTC instructors and my athletic advisor were horrified when I told them what had happened. We got a restraining order that day against my mom's husband. He couldn't come on campus, I wasn't allowed to walk on campus alone, and my roommates got extra security. A few weeks later, my mom's husband tried to kill her on my 19th birthday. He was in his car and he'd thrown her a phone which she was using to dial 911 on the passenger seat. When she reached in to get it, he grabbed her arm and held her while he reversed out of the driveway and dragged her down the alley. Then he let her go and her head slammed against the ground and she got a concussion. He tried to back over her, but she screamed and rolled away and he ran over her foot and hand. At that point, our neighbor came out of his house and screamed, which scared him away, and my brother and mother went into hiding that night. Sitting on those stairs, certain my family was dead and I was also about to die, was the scariest moment of my life. And then having someone bang on the door and not answer when I was screaming at them, and having to open it thinking it was a killer on the other side, creepiest thing ever. Stalked by a Client by Bootberry. I used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what had happened. I'll spare the details, but it was horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school while I and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "It's my kid, I'll do what I want and you can't stop me." When I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said, "If we were outside this building right now, I would fucking kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day we had court for the children, and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague who attended told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where's that cunt of a worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a bit of resilience working in this field, and overall I mainly felt relieved that these children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close, I thought I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car. Just for a second, and then it was gone. It was about 20 meters away at that point, but it startled me. So I stood there for just a second looking at my car, wondering if I was being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing tiny rustling noises, and whether I was imagining things or not, all of the true crime horror stories I've ever heard flashed into my mind. Safe to say, I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come and pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the doors, I had convinced myself I was being silly, and I asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around, and with the headlights shining on my car, I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She'd organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then, about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it, and it was a note that said, "You're as good as dead, bitch." The words were typed and printed. Our receptionist was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I am convinced it was the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They addressed me as bitch and homewrecker, saying that I kidnapped and abused children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing the letters threatened to rape, torture, kill, find out where I lived, and was going to burn the entire building down. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence, and I'd never had anything like this happen before. They did say they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they'd been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously, too. All of the security was bumped up across the building, and all staff completed refresher trainings on emergency management. One day on the way home from work, I noticed that a car was following me. At first I thought I was being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets, double-backed onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. And even after all that, a dark green Toyota Camry was still parked a little way behind me. I freaked out, but I'd already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic, I'd forgotten to get the license plate, and that upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. Honestly, I was very ready to quit, but then COVID happened. It really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown and all access to the office was restricted. I started working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By that time, we were allowed back in the office, and there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family. And as for the man who I believed stalked and threatened me for doing my job, let's not meet ever again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, why not like and subscribe to this channel and share it with all your friends? If you're not following me on social media, links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take your support even further, there's a link to my Patreon page and my storefront at tpublic.com. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise while you're at it. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.